The snow had fallen harder than anyone had expected that morning. By noon, it was a blinding sheet of white, coating the world in a hushed, frozen stillness. In the middle of it, a dog lay shivering on the icy ground, abandoned and alone. His fur was matted, his body emaciated. The snow piled higher around him, burying him inch by inch, as though nature itself was preparing to swallow him whole. The dog's eyes were wide, glazed over with fear, but he didn't whimper. He couldn't. His body was too weak, his spirit nearly extinguished. His breath came in shallow gasps, barely visible in the freezing air, and every moment felt like an eternity. There was no one in sight, no one to save him. The world had gone silent, and in that silence, the dog was just another casualty of an uncaring world. But then, out of nowhere, a single figure appeared on the horizon, a stranger, whose fate had unexpectedly aligned with this dog's final moments. As the figure drew nearer, the dog's eyes, clouded with despair, flickered with a brief spark of hope. This person, with their coat wrapped tightly around them, wasn't a rescuer, they were a mere passerby. Or so they thought. Show your love, hit like, share, and subscribe for more. The wind howled across the empty field, its icy fingers tearing at the earth and biting into skin. The man's breath came in plumes as he trudged through the snow, his footsteps leaving a trail behind him. He had been walking for miles, his legs heavy, his mind preoccupied with the weight of his day. There was no reason for him to be here. No reason, except the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. That was when he saw it. The small, still figure of a dog collapsed in the middle of nowhere, eyes vacant and distant. His first thought was simple: a stray, just another lost soul of the city. But something about this one, something in the quiet agony of his stance, stopped him dead in his tracks. His heart seemed to skip a beat, and in that instant, the world narrowed down to this one moment. There was no logical explanation, no reason to stop. But still, he found himself crouching beside the dog. The snow was falling faster now, settling in layers around the dog's body. His breath was faint, weak, almost imperceptible against the relentless wind. As the man gently reached out to touch him, his fingers brushed the cold fur and felt a tremor run through the dog's body. There was no bark of joy, no desperate licks of gratitude, just cold, empty stillness. In that moment the man knew, this wasn't just a stray. This was a soul on the brink of disappearing. The dog had no future here in the snow, and yet, here he was, caught between life and death. The man's heart thudded with a painful understanding. This wasn't a choice, it was a chance. He bent down, cradling the fragile form in his arms, and stood up, determined to give the dog what he so desperately needed: another chance. The snow, which had once felt so isolating, now seemed to form a path toward something more. It was a path of redemption. The trek back to his truck was grueling, each step weighed down by the unbearable burden of the dog's frailty. The man's arms ached from holding the trembling body, but the silence of the snow kept him focused. His breath, shallow and strained, was the only sound that broke through the blizzard's roar. The dog remained motionless in his arms, as though he had surrendered to the inevitable. The man could feel the dog's heartbeat, weak and erratic, pressing against his chest. Every few seconds the dog would stir, a faint groan escaping him. But there was no strength behind it, only the hollow echo of survival instinct. Once in the truck, the man laid the dog gently on the passenger seat, the heat of the interior wrapping around them both like a soft embrace. He reached for his phone, dialing the number of the nearest vet. He had no plan, no real sense of what he was doing. But he couldn't just turn back now. He had crossed a line, a point of no return. The vet's voice was muffled, calm, but even in that moment, there was no magic answer, no guarantee. The man hung up the phone, staring ahead through the windshield, the snow blurring everything into a vision of uncertainty. But the silence in the truck was different now. It wasn't the deathly quiet of the snowstorm. It was the quiet of possibility, of fragile hope. It was the quiet before something beautiful could begin. The vet was waiting for them when they arrived, a soft-spoken woman in a white coat who immediately set to work. She whispered to the dog as she examined him, running her hands over his thin body with a tenderness that spoke more than her words ever could. The man hovered by the door, feeling as though he didn't belong in this sacred space of healing. The dog was pale, his breathing erratic, but his pulse was steady, still alive. There was something about the way the man watched, the way he hovered at the edge of this life, or death moment, that changed everything. "What's his name?" the vet asked quietly, her fingers brushing through the dog's tangled fur. The man stared at the dog, his eyes wide and searching. I don't know." The vet nodded, her hands moving with careful precision. "We'll call him Max for now," she said. "Max has a lot of fight left in him. We just need to help him find it." The man, for the first time in hours, felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Max. The dog wasn't a nameless casualty, a discarded thing. He was Max, he was someone. Max's heart rate began to steady, his body warming under the gentle ministrations of the vet. The man stood at the window, watching the snow fall outside, a storm raging in the world. But in this room, with its soft lights and the gentle hum of the vet's equipment, there was peace. There was hope. Days passed and Max began to recover. The man returned every day, his once uncertain actions now filled with purpose. At first, Max had been timid, skittish, unsure of the world around him. But slowly the walls began to crumble. Max would lift his head when the man entered the room, his eyes now gleaming with something different. A spark, a fire that had once been hidden beneath the layers of pain. One day the man walked into the room, his shoes crunching softly on the snow-covered ground, and Max stood up, his tail giving a hesitant wag. The man's heart leaped at the sight, and he crouched down, holding his hand out. Max hesitated, sniffing the air, before he took a tentative step forward, nuzzling the man's hand gently. It wasn't a jump into full trust, but it was a beginning. The road ahead was long. There were moments when Max would flinch, when the man would have to remind himself that this wasn't an overnight recovery. But every small gesture, every step forward, was a victory. The bond between them grew stronger, their silent communication deepening. Max had learned to trust again, and in turn, the man had learned that saving a life didn't just mean giving shelter or food. It meant giving time, patience, and the willingness to believe in something greater than himself. The snow was starting to melt as spring approached, but the memory of that cold, brutal day would stay with the man forever. Max was now more than just a survivor. He was a part of the man's life, a companion, a friend. They spent their days walking through the park, Max's tail wagging with each step. The transformation was complete. The dog who had once been on the brink of death now ran through the grass, leaping and barking in joy. The man watched him, a smile breaking through the lines of his face. It had been a year since that day, and Max had grown stronger with every passing moment. They were no longer two strangers thrown together by fate. They were a family, bound by an unspoken understanding. The man looked at Max, who was now resting his head on the man's lap, his eyes soft and content. The sun dipped low, casting a warm, golden light across the park. It was a perfect moment. Quiet, peaceful, full of the promise of tomorrow. The man stroked Max's fur gently, his hand moving in slow, rhythmic circles. "You're not alone anymore, buddy," he whispered, the words a promise he would keep. The world had changed that day in the snow. The man hadn't just saved Max's life. Max had saved his too. Months passed and Max continued to thrive, his once weak body now full of energy and spirit. The seasons shifted, painting the world in hues of green and gold, then to fiery reds and browns. Through it all, the bond between the man and Max grew stronger, deeper. They became a quiet force, two beings who had been broken by the world, but had come together to heal in their own way. The man's life, once filled with solitude and the constant hum of routine, had been transformed. Every walk with Max was an adventure. Every moment together, whether spent in silence or in laughter, was a reminder of the unpredictable beauty of life. It was on one such walk, the autumn leaves swirling around their feet, that the man realized just how much Max had changed him. There was a softness to his heart now, a tenderness he had never allowed himself before. Max had not only opened his heart, but had taught him the power of patience, of giving without expecting anything in return. The man had learned that sometimes, the most important part of a rescue wasn't the act of saving, it was the act of learning to be saved in return. Max had his own routine now. He would wait at the door every morning, tail wagging, eager for the day's walk. He had grown protective, his earlier hesitation replaced by a quiet confidence. His once feeble steps had turned into energetic bounds, his eyes bright with the joy of life. The man watched as Max ran ahead, his movements graceful and free. He couldn't help but smile. This dog, once on the brink of death, now carried with him the light of 1,000 moments of joy. But the world wasn't perfect. A shadow of fear still lingered in Max's eyes when they passed the places where the snow had once fallen the hardest. It was as if his body remembered the pain, the fear, the cold. The man would always slow his pace when this happened, his hand gently resting on Max's back. It was a simple gesture, but it was enough to remind Max that he wasn't alone anymore, not in the snow, not in the world. With every step they took together, the past was slowly fading into the distance, replaced by a future that was full of promise. One crisp morning, the man decided to take Max on a trip to the mountains. He had never ventured there before with Max, but something told him it was time. As they ascended the winding roads, the view opening up to vast stretches of green fields and towering pines, Max's eyes sparkled. The air was fresh, tinged with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the world felt infinitely small beneath their feet. The man could sense Max's excitement, his ears perked up, his tail wagging enthusiastically. They stopped at a quiet overlook, the world spread out before them. The man sat on a large rock, his legs stretched out, Max lying at his side. For a while, they simply sat in silence, watching the mountains bathe in the golden light of the early morning. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that only comes when two beings have shared enough moments to understand the rhythm of each other's heartbeats. Max's head rested against the man's leg, his eyes closing in contentment. The man stroked his fur, marveling at how far they had come. When Max had first been found in the snow, there had been no future for him, just the cold and empty landscape, and the quiet despair of survival. But now, here they were. Max, a dog once lost, now a symbol of resilience and second chances. The man felt a swell of gratitude, the weight of it heavy in his chest. As he looked down at Max, the weight of their shared journey hit him fully. He hadn't just rescued Max. Max had given him something he never thought he could find again, hope. In return, he had given Max a life full of love, trust, and understanding. They had saved each other, piece by broken piece. The mountains, once towering symbols of isolation, now felt like a place of sanctuary. In this vast, wild world they had found each other, and that, the man realized, was enough. The years continued to pass, and with each one Max and the man grew older together. The dog's once sprightly steps slowed with age, and his muzzle began to turn grey, but his spirit remained unchanged. Every morning, Max would still wait by the door, his eyes bright with the same eager joy as when he had first been rescued. The world outside had changed in many ways. New cities had been built, faces had come and gone, but Max had remained a constant, his presence like a steady heartbeat in the man's life. As winter approached again, the air carrying a familiar chill, the man and Max walked through the park, just as they had done countless times before. The snowflakes began to fall gently, dusting the ground in a delicate blanket of white. The man felt a pang of nostalgia, the memory of that fateful day in the snow when everything had changed. Max's breath came in steady puffs, his head held high, the snow falling softly around him. He had made it through that storm just like the man had. For a brief moment, the man stopped, watching Max as he ran ahead, his energy still infectious. The dog paused, turning his head to look at the man, his eyes filled with an unspoken understanding. There were no words between them. There never needed to be. The bond they shared had transcended language long ago. The man smiled, a soft, content smile that reached his eyes. He knew that Max's time was coming to an end, but that didn't scare him. What mattered now was that they had lived this life together. What mattered was that they had both found a home in each other. Max had been the dog who had taught him the meaning of unconditional love, of second chances, and of the healing power of simply being present. And when the time came for Max to rest, as it inevitably would, the man knew that he would be ready. Not because he wasn't afraid of loss, but because he had already known the gift of having someone who had saved his life. They had lived their lives side by side, a bond forged in the snow and nurtured in the warmth of love. And that, in itself, was a forever promise. As the snow continued to fall around them, the man looked at Max one last time, his heart full. With a deep breath, he whispered softly, "Thank you, Max. You saved me too." And together, they walked on, the world around them fading into a quiet, peaceful moment of timeless connection. Winter had fully settled in, blanketing the world in white once again. But there was a stillness now that felt different. The familiar crunch of snow underfoot, the gentle gusts of wind through the trees. It all felt quieter somehow. Max was slower now, his joints aching, his breathing labored at times. But his eyes, those bright, knowing eyes, still held the same light that had first sparked when they met. The man could feel it in every stride, that unspoken understanding between them. This walk, just like every walk before it, held a weight. A reminder of how far they had come, how many days they had shared together. But this walk, perhaps, would be the last. It was the man who noticed first. The way Max's steps were more hesitant now, his body leaning slightly to one side, as if bracing against some unseen weight. He slowed his pace, his hand reaching out to rest gently on Max's back. The old dog leaned into the touch, a soft sigh escaping his lips. For a moment, it felt as though the world had stopped moving, as if they were both suspended in time, caught in a moment of perfect peace. "Are you tired, buddy?" the man asked softly, his voice carrying on the crisp air. Max didn't answer, he never did. But his eyes met the man's, and in them was a quiet acceptance, an acknowledgement of the journey they had taken together. There was no need for words. The man had always known when Max needed him, and now, as the dog's steps slowed even further, he could feel the shift. It wasn't a physical pain, but something deeper. A quiet understanding that Max was ready. The man reached down, gently lifting Max into his arms. It wasn't difficult. Max was light now, the weight of his earlier years long gone. He cradled the dog carefully, as if holding the most fragile thing in the world. The wind was still biting, the snow swirling around them like the world itself was trying to hide the truth. But in that moment, the man didn't care. All that mattered was Max, and the time they had left. They made their way back to the car, the old truck waiting in the parking lot, its engine idling softly. The man placed Max in the passenger seat, carefully securing him with a blanket to keep him warm. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him, the uncertainty, the fear. But there was no other choice, not when Max had already given everything he had. The man had always known this day would come, but it didn't make it easier. It only made the love he felt for this dog more profound, more meaningful. Max lay quietly, his head resting against the window, his eyes half closed. The man reached over, stroking the dog's fur one last time, his hand trembling with the weight of the moment. "Thank you for everything, Max," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." The drive to the vet was slow, each mile feeling longer than the last. The world outside was cold, harsh, but inside the car, it was a quiet warmth. The radio played softly, a soothing melody filling the space between them, as if to offer some comfort to the final moments they had together. Max was peaceful, calm, but the man knew the time had come. When they arrived, the vet was waiting. The man didn't need to say anything. She could see it in his eyes, the pain, the sorrow, the love. She led him into the quiet room, where the soft light glowed warmly against the sterile white walls. Max lay on the examination table, his head resting in the man's lap. The man stroked his fur one last time, his heart breaking with each passing second. Max's breathing slowed, his eyes fluttering closed. The room was filled with nothing but the sound of soft breaths and the occasional rustle of the vet's movements. The man whispered, his voice barely audible, "You'll always be with me, Max. Always." And then, with a final sigh, Max let go. His body relaxed, and the man held him close, not wanting to let go of the life they had built together. Tears slipped down his face, but in his heart there was peace. Max had lived a full life. He had found love, trust, and friendship again. And in the end, that was all he needed. That was all they needed. The days that followed were filled with a quiet sadness, a grief that hung in the air like a heavy mist. The man walked through the park, alone now, the empty space beside him a constant reminder of what he had lost. But even in his sorrow, he felt the presence of Max with him, a quiet warmth that lingered in the corners of his heart. One day, as the man sat on the bench where he and Max had often rested, he felt a sudden peace settle over him. He looked up at the sky, the soft blue fading into the golden hues of sunset. A breeze stirred the leaves, and he could almost hear Max's paws crunching in the snow, the sound of his breathing, the quiet thud of his tail wagging. The man smiled softly, a tear slipping down his cheek. "You're still here," he whispered, the words carrying with them all the love and gratitude he had never said aloud. It was in that moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon, that the man realized something beautiful. Max had saved him, not just in that moment in the snow, but every day they had spent together. He had shown him how to love, how to be open, how to heal. Max had been a gift that would never fade, not in the man's heart. He stood up, wiping the tears from his face, and walked away from the bench. The world was still cold, still harsh, but now it didn't seem so empty. Max had taught him that love was never lost. It was always carried in the heart, a memory that could never be taken away. And as the man walked on, his heart a little lighter, he knew one thing for certain: he would never forget Max, the dog who had been left to die in the snow. The dog who had given him everything forever. The world felt a little brighter, and with each step, the man carried Max with him, always. The seasons continued their eternal march, shifting and changing with the natural rhythm of life. Spring arrived, softening the earth and coaxing the flowers to bloom. The man spent his mornings in the park, walking along the familiar path where he and Max had shared so many moments. It felt strange at first, walking alone, the echo of Max's paws absent in the quiet. There were days when it felt impossible to imagine life without him, when the weight of the loss felt like an insurmountable wall. But each day, as the sun rose higher and the flowers bloomed brighter, the man felt a small shift within himself. There were days when he would stop at the bench they used to sit on, his hand resting gently on the wooden backrest. In those moments, he could almost feel Max beside him, the warmth of his presence still lingering in the air. The scent of pine and fresh grass would stir memories of their walks together, of Max bounding ahead, full of energy, or pausing to look back at the man, as if waiting for him to catch up. The man would close his eyes and smile, letting the memory wash over him, a quiet comfort amid the sadness. Yet, even in the absence of Max's physical presence, the man realized that the dog had left behind something far more lasting, an imprint on his soul. It wasn't a feeling of emptiness, but a deep, abiding gratitude. Max had taught him to love without hesitation, to embrace life's imperfections, and to find joy in the simplest of moments. The man had learned, in those final years with Max, how to let go of his own walls, how to open his heart fully. And now, without the dog at his side, he found himself living with more compassion, more patience, and more understanding than he had ever thought possible. But the grief still came in waves. There were moments when the man would pass a street corner, and the familiar scent of the cold winter air would bring back memories of Max's trembling body in the snow. He would catch himself reaching out, as though expecting the dog to nudge his hand in greeting. But the space beside him remained empty. And yet, in those moments, he didn't feel entirely alone. The love they had shared still burned brightly within him, like an ember that refused to go out. As time passed, the man began to feel a pull toward helping others. He started volunteering at the local animal shelter, offering his time and energy to the very creatures who had once, like Max, been abandoned and forgotten. The shelter was a place of quiet redemption, where animals who had suffered found new beginnings, just as Max had. And in each animal he met, the man saw echoes of the dog he had lost, fragile bodies, broken spirits, but also the glimmer of hope. It was there, amid the barking and the wagging tails, that the man felt his heart begin to heal in ways he hadn't expected. He worked closely with the shelter's staff, helping care for the animals, training the dogs, and providing the love and attention they so desperately needed. It wasn't an easy task. Many of the dogs were fearful, scarred by their pasts, much like Max had been. But as the man spent more time with them, he saw something he hadn't expected: the incredible resilience of these creatures. It was as though, with every dog he helped, he was honoring Max's memory, giving back the love that had once been so freely given to him. One day, while cleaning one of the cages, the man met a dog that reminded him so much of Max. She was small, with dark, soulful eyes and a coat that was matted from neglect. Her body trembled as he approached, her tail tucked between her legs, but when he crouched down to her level, she looked up at him. There was fear in her gaze, but also a flicker of curiosity. The man slowly extended his hand, letting her take in his scent. She sniffed his fingers tentatively, her body stiff, and for a long moment, they simply stared at each other. And in that moment, the man understood. This wasn't just about rescuing animals, it was about healing, his own wounds and theirs. It was about learning to trust again, to open his heart to new beginnings, even when the past still hurt. The man smiled, his heart swelling with a deep, quiet joy. This was what Max had taught him, the importance of second chances for both the rescuer and the rescued. The man found himself visiting the shelter regularly, volunteering more and more of his time. Over the months, he developed a deep connection with the animals. But there was one dog, one special dog, who stood out among the rest. Her name was Luna, and she was a gentle soul with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. She had been abandoned just like Max, left to fend for herself on the streets. Her fur was thin, and she had scars from her time alone, but there was a quiet wisdom in her gaze that reminded the man of the dog he had lost. Luna had been in the shelter for several months, waiting for a family to adopt her, but no one had come for her. She was too shy, too quiet, too broken. And yet, every time the man came in, he found himself drawn to her. He would sit by her cage, talking to her softly, offering her the same gentle touch that Max had once given him. Over time, Luna began to trust him, just as Max had. She would slowly approach him, nuzzle his hand, and even lie down next to him when he sat on the floor. It wasn't long before the man realized that Luna had found a home with him. The bond between them was undeniable, and when the time came to adopt, the man knew he couldn't leave without her. Luna had become a part of his life, a continuation of the love he had shared with Max. She wasn't a replacement, she was a new chapter, a new journey. When they left the shelter together, Luna by his side, the man looked up at the sky, the clouds parting to reveal a clear blue sky. He felt a profound sense of peace, as if everything had come full circle. Max's spirit was still with him, guiding him, showing him that love, though fleeting, was never truly lost. It simply transformed, finding new ways to be shared, new hearts to touch. Years passed, and Luna became the center of the man's life. She wasn't Max, but she didn't need to be. Luna had her own personality, her own quirks, and in her the man found a new source of joy. They spent their days exploring new parks, taking long walks, and simply enjoying each other's company. Luna's trust, once fragile, had blossomed into an unwavering bond, and the man couldn't help but smile at the memory of the shy dog he had once met in the shelter. Max's memory never faded. He was there, in every corner of the man's home, in the soft paw prints Luna left in the snow, in the quiet moments they shared by the fire. Max had given the man so much, more than words could express. And now, with Luna by his side, the man felt that the love he had once thought was lost had been reborn, stronger than ever. It was a new beginning, one that carried with it the weight of all the lessons learned, all the love shared, and all the lives touched. And as the man looked down at Luna, her tail wagging happily, he knew that this was the way it was meant to be. Max had given him the gift of a second chance, and Luna had given him the gift of a new life, one filled with love, hope, and the promise of tomorrow. And in that quiet moment, as the sun set on another beautiful day, the man whispered, "Thank you, Max. I'll carry you with me always." The world seemed to pause in that moment, as if the love they had shared would never truly end. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the world, the man walked side by side with Luna, her tail wagging in the evening breeze. Max's memory lived on in every step, in every quiet moment of peace they shared. He had taught the man to love, to heal, and to embrace the beauty of second chances. With Luna now by his side, the man knew that love never truly fades. It transforms, finding new hearts to touch. And as they walked into the future, the man whispered softly, "Thank you, Max. I carry you with me always."